welcome to today's IAMS vodcast. My name's Kelly. I'm the veterinary manager at IAMS, and today I'll be joined by certified clinical behaviorist Karen Wild for the second time this series, talking about separation anxiety in dogs. Now, although the COVID-19 lockdown hasn't been completely unlocked yet, we're starting to see green shoots with certain restrictions being relaxed, which is great news for us, but will it be tough for our dogs? Being able to leave the house more means obviously leaving them at home, which, you know, could be a problem for dogs that have really enjoyed having our company. So today, Carol will be helping us to understand why separation anxiety in dogs occurs, what you can do to prevent it, and practical tips on how to help dogs who already struggle with separation anxiety. So just before we ask Karen some questions, I'm just going to do a little introduction for those of you who don't know her. So Karen is a certified clinical animal behaviorist with over 20 years experience in working with pets. She is a member of the Fellow of Animal Behaviour Clinicians, a full member of the Association of Pet Behavioural Counsellors, the Animal Behaviour and Training Council, and is a registered clinical animal behaviourist and animal training instructor. She's a very clever lady. She's also an author, having written 5 books, including What Your Dog Wants and 21 Days to the Perfect Dog. And she's even worked with a number of well-known celebrities, such as BBC broadcaster and comic relief director Emma Freud, Davina McCall, and has even worked with pets living in Downing Street. So grateful to have you back and honoured that you're giving us some of your time again today. Thank you.
No problem. It's my pleasure.
Yeah, so I think we'll get straight into the questions, because obviously it's something a lot of us are thinking about at the moment, those of us who have dogs. So we know, like, I don't know about you, but I'm certainly reading in the media that there's separation anxieties in dogs is likely to spike once the lockdown is lifted. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's entirely logical to assume that they've got used to us being around, and that brought its own issues. And now all of a sudden we will be going back to work, those of us that weren't, and they are going to wonder what on earth has happened. And I think animals by proxy are aware of what happens to us. I don't think they've got any concept of the bigger situation, but definitely they will notice our absence, especially if it's sudden, you know, and that is a big problem on the horizon if we're not careful.
Okay. And just so we're all really clear, what exactly is separation anxiety?
So it's a banner headline, if you like, and people recognise it, but what it kind of refers to is where you've got an animal that is, you know, doesn't really cope very well with being either isolated, so it could be that they're on their own and they're distressed because they're just isolated by themselves, or it could be that they're very attached to a certain situation, another pet or a person, and suddenly that's gone. And that causes them a lot of distress, a lot of anxiety, and it's extremely difficult for them to deal with because, like I mentioned, they can't understand why we aren't there. And pets are companion animals, you know, they are a social species, dogs and cats generally, particularly dogs. And so it's something that is a natural response. So it can be sort of very sudden and creep up on us very slowly as well if we don't take steps to prevent it.
So you say it's a natural response. I'm assuming because they're pack animals and they see us as part of their pack. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, most people would say that their pets are the family, you know, they're part of the family. So whether that means the same thing to them or not, it's hard to say. But I would say that any social creature, and some are more social than others, of course, but, you know, it's any social creature,
much like us as humans, Karen.
Yeah, well, any animal that is a companion, you know, then of course we're there because we're friends with them, you know, and then if you suddenly don't have them anymore, then they're going to miss us.
Yeah. And why do you think some dogs struggle with separation anxiety more than others? Or is it something that is in all dogs that we just may not see the symptoms as much?
I think that some dogs tolerate it better than others. Some dogs are more dependent on it as a part of their, you know, their reward chemistry. You know, they like to be around people. We've all got used to the dog that kind of likes to be all over us all of the time. And then there are dogs that just aren't that bothered, you know, and I've got 4 dogs and there's a mixture amongst them. So their personalities, if you like, are quite different, their characters. But generally, they are a social species, so they are entitled to have that option of companionship and company. And I think that if we just used to go out to work and leave the dog on its own all day, we might assume, oh, the dog's coping, but actually they may not be tearing the curtains down, but they also may not be enjoying it very much. So this is a good opportunity for us to look at that and decide, you know, am I actually looking after my dog as, you know, as well as I could be, my best friend? You know, am I taking care of their needs? And that's not to, you know, beat anyone about the head. We've got to work, but we can ease the passage, I think.
Yeah, and actually you made me think of something there. Do you think, as with people, that we can be introverts and extroverts? Some people love company and strive to find it at every opportunity, and some people just like the shy introverted, just want to be on their own most of the time. Dogs have a similar profile?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's when you compare it to other species, for example, cats can be very friendly, but generally they don't necessarily need social company. But even then, we all know of somebody's cat or somebody's dog that is kind of really, really super cuddly and wants a lot of contact. And then we also all know ones that really aren't. So I think it's perfectly natural, even within a litter, that you'll see that variation. So I wouldn't suggest, oh, a breed is more likely to be like this, or a particular, you know, dog. It's more about the individual dog and what they've got used to.
Okay.
What feeds their habit, you know, what do they like? Because we've all got preference.
Yeah, and actually it's interesting you say that, because my next question was going to be, you know, is it genetic? Is it caused? Is it breed related? Is it driven by experience? What's the biggest factor, do you think?
I mean, in my job, I deal with dogs that have got, you know, problems with separation issues. So they, you know, they either have been left too much and they haven't got enough to do, which is, again, perfectly understandable, or ones that form a very strong attachment to either an individual or lots of people, or just generally company. So what I would say is that I don't think there's a great deal of evidence to show, oh, this breed is more likely, but
Okay.
I think it would make sense for us to breed from dogs that like being around people, because if we want them as pets, I mean if they're a pet and they're coming to live in your house, then it's probably a good idea that they like us, you know. So I think over the years we maybe have had a hand in that, but I also think that it is very much down to the individual, and how they cope can vary quite a bit as well, and how we deal with it therefore can vary.
And how can people tell if their dog has separation anxiety? What are the signs? And are some more not more obvious than others?
Oh no, there are. I mean, there's extreme signs, but again, we have to pick apart, is this because the dog has nothing else to do? Are they bored? You know, so it could be that they're just destroying things in the house, for example, because they've got nothing else to do.
Okay, so if I could just stop you there.
Yeah.
So many people, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, would say, I go out, the dog destroys the house, he has separation anxiety, and almost place that diagnosis on the dog's head because of that behaviour. Are you saying then, in that case, it's not always necessarily, destructive behaviour is not always a symptom of separation anxiety?
No, not always. No, I mean, not every dog is destructive when they're suffering from an attachment issue, but what you'd more likely see is that they would destroy the points of exit. So they might be around, you know, a doorway or something like that, or digging at a wall, or, you know, to try and get from one room to another. And I've seen substantial damage from dogs that have tried to, you know, get out the door, or sometimes around windows. But equally, you could have a dog that has seen someone walk past a window and got very excitable and, you know, ripped at the curtains because someone's walking by. So what we normally do in my job is we sort of talk about all of the different signs that the owner has spotted. But it can be things like, some dogs I work with, they don't like the owners to leave. You know, they will physically try and stop the owner leaving, or they just have that kind of look on their face because they know that you're about to go and they don't like it, you know. So I think that there's a whole range of things. You could also get excess, like barking. So again, barking can be caused by lots of things. If they hear something outside, they might bark. But if they're barking and howling and barking and howling because they're on their own, then, you know, then you might well think, oh, that's to do with the fact that I'm not here, rather than just they've been activated by the bins being picked up or whatever. So what we try and do is we don't just say this dog has separation anxiety. We say, is it isolation distress? So is the dog bored and got nothing better to do, so they're just chewing? Or is the dog really anxious and upset the minute you've gone because they can't then comfort themselves, and what they need for comfort is your company or some form of company. So we have to be a little bit careful, because if we got that wrong and we then try and do things to help, we might not do the right things.
So you're saying about destructive behaviours. If, let's say, a dog has separation anxiety but doesn't show destructive behavioural patterns, what else could be a sign?
So, they could just be really unhappy. And then there aren't any obvious signals, but then normally we wouldn't see them because the owner wouldn't know about it. But pacing, howling, barking, sometimes they wee or poo on the floor, but that's from distress, but it could be because they just need the toilet and they can't get out, they would, often you would see some form of anxious behaviour, shivering, panting, those kinds of things. And of course, we didn't have the luxury of filming our pets years ago, but now we do. And lots of my clients have set up cameras. You can either buy special ones, or you can just use a normal app on a phone or an iPad or a laptop screen or whatever, and leave a camera observing your dog. So that's how I know that's what they do, because I get sent the video of the clients sort of saying, I don't know if this is a sign of stress or not, so we get evidence now of what they're doing. But unfortunately, what tends to happen is the only time people notice is when it becomes extreme. So something has been ripped apart, or the neighbours have complained, and by that time we know the dog is really unhappy. So then we've got to try and bring them back from that brink, and that can sometimes take some time. It's almost never an instant situation with this, again, because it's built up over a while and it's a natural response to being left on their own.
Yeah, and to that point, more of a selfish question here. Got 2 dogs. Don't think that they suffer with separation anxiety, certainly not show me any of the signs that you've just mentioned. But, and I think this might resonate with people, when I go out, we get the big brown eyes at the door, and it's like they're psychic. They know before I know that I'm going out, that I'm about to go, and they'll stand by the door at the exit place that you were talking about, right? And they'll stand there and look at me and look at the doors and say, right, because I do take my dogs to as many places as I can. So they immediately assume that we're going. And when they don't get to come, and then I put on this silly performing voice saying, I'm coming back, and don't worry. And it's ridiculous, but you see yourself falling into that trap and putting on this crazy voice. So, is that should I be worried that there's separation anxiety issues, or is that just something that dogs do? They look at you because they love you and they want to go wherever you are.
That depends on your dogs. Like you just explained a pattern where they normally come with you and then they don't come with you. So it's quite likely that you're interpreting that correctly, that they're kind of going, well, are we coming? And if they want to come and they can't, for whatever reason, then that's probably like because they enjoy it and they can't do the thing they enjoy. So I think that kind of is quite a reasonable assumption. So whether that affects them on the level of severity, we don't know. We would have to probably look at what they're doing after you've gone, for example. But I think there are always levels to these kinds of things where it becomes, they don't like something but they tolerate it. They don't like something, but they can't tolerate it. And it's when they can't tolerate it that we end up with the problem. And that, it isn't nice for them to feel uncomfortable ever. So ideally, what we always go for is not just that they tolerate the fact that they're on their own and whatever, that they actively want you to go out the door because their life either stays just as good or improves somewhat because you're not there. So it might be that you've given them something to do that they only get to enjoy when you're not there. So in which case you've got your dog virtually scooting you out of the door going, can you go now? Because I'd like to have my chewy toy that I'm allowed to have when you're not around. So that's what we aim for when we're trying to help them. We don't just want them to sit there looking a bit sad. And we definitely don't want them to be, panicking or stressed beyond belief and losing control of their bowels. We definitely don't want that. But ideally, we want them to kind of go, oh, it's actually fine when you're not here, no problem.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's quite reassuring for people to know, actually, because I think sometimes when we close the door, if we don't have one of those wonderful cameras, you think, what are they doing? Are they okay? But they're probably just sitting on the couch sleeping. And
Well, the goal is, I mean, dogs, obviously, they need to sleep quite a lot. And if you're exercising, and it depends on their age, of course, but if you're exercising them before you go, then they're more inclined to have a nap anyway, you know, and it's normally that first sort of half an hour, we've got some evidence that that's kind of the worst point at which they kind of really don't like it. And then they could be disturbed by things externally and that sort of thing. But the first kind of peak, if you like, is after you've just gone, and they will try and get back to you. So it's not such a bad thing to think, well, actually, they're tired out now because I've done their walks, you know, they've had their food, they've got access to water, they're, you know, everything else I have done that I could do, I've given them things to do that I know they enjoy, then, you know, don't feel bad about leaving them. But obviously we're not going to be talking about leaving them for hours and hours and hours and hours with nothing to do, you know, pop back for 10 minutes and leave them for another 3 hours. It's not really, that's not a very nice life for them. So there's a balance, I think, with all these things, isn't there?
yeah, there is. And obviously life goes on. And, you know, sorry to ask you this pointed question, but how long is too long? How, you know, to leave your dogs, is there a magic number, or does it depend on the dog? Does it depend on their lifestyle? I'm sure it's not as easy to put a number on it, but
yeah,
yeah,
I mean,
if you're working 8-9 hours a day,
it's too long, really, isn't it? I mean, there are guidelines, there are animal welfare guidelines on that, but they are guidelines. You know, if you look up, I would, you know, advise anyone to go and look up the 5 freedoms. You know, the Animal Welfare Act, and how, and you know, you can find it anywhere on the internet. The RSPCA website will tell you what your dogs, or what all animals have a right to, you know, and a right to normal social behavior, a right to shelter, a right to, you know, those kinds of things. So if you think a normal social species is being denied that for 9 hours a day, that is not good for their welfare under any circumstances. But whether if you've got a very young dog, obviously they're, you know, you want them to be out, you want to be educating them regularly, then you don't want to be leaving a young dog for hours on end, because it's not, you know, they will just be shut away from society. Whereas if you've got an older dog that's probably, that you know they're fine with it, they have a very busy life the rest of the time, you might make that decision on the basis of their welfare. And that's what we've got to look at, because this is always a fine line between what we have to do as working people, you know, and what we can provide for our dogs. And I would say that if you get to a point where you're thinking, no, I'm going to be leaving them regularly for 3 or 4 hour stints several times a day, that is no life for them. And we either need to provide care for them, which is a bit tricky at the moment because we don't have the daycare and the dog walking, but generally you would have that. Or perhaps a dog is not the right pet for you, you know, because it isn't about us, it's about us and them.
Yeah. Why do you want to have a dog? I want to have a dog because I want one. Maybe that's not the right, that's like the common answer to that question, but maybe it's not the right answer.
Well, they aren't robots, you know, we don't just switch them off when we go out the door. I mean, to us, that's what it feels like, unless you've got a camera watching them. But, you know, that's not what happens to them. So their experiences obviously are going to vary depending on the kind of animal that they are, you know, what sort of character that they have. But in general terms, to be left with nothing to do for hours and hours and hours, there's only so many hours you can sleep in a day. You know, so it's not right for them. So I would always caution anyone to seek help with that. If you've got a dog that you are now thinking, oh my goodness, try and find someone in your bubble at the moment, or somebody who can actually help you with caring for them if you're struggling, you know, because it's very important for everyone. You feel better and they feel better, and you don't get problems further down the line.
Okay, so before we get onto practical advice on what people can do to try and prevent it, to not to cure it, but to work with it, can you answer me this? Do cats get separation anxiety? Have you ever worked with any cats, or is this just a dog thing?
Oh, no. I mean, I think any animal that forms a bond, doesn't matter what breed, doesn't matter what species, nothing, will be prone to feeling like they are missing something when that thing isn't there anymore. So I would say that that's perfectly natural, you know. And some species, like if you were talking about companion animals, then obviously you're going to think, well, that's more likely. So we all, I'm sure, have experience of cats that have just been so loving and so all over us, and they don't like not having that. So I think it makes sense to assume that there are some that would just really not enjoy it. But in a lot of ways, we see cats as, they're not little dogs, you know, they are a different species, and they are more solitary in general, and they're not obliged to be part of a social group necessarily to be happy, which is why sometimes people will get another cat to keep their existing cat company, and their existing cat is like, no, I like my space, I like my territory, what are you, now we've got an intruder. So you know, it's not the same assumption, is what I'm trying to say. I think I would be very aware, like I've got a cat and I've got 4 dogs and they all get on fine, but my cat can access places my dog cannot. Yeah. And he likes that freedom. And if I brought in another cat, I think he would really not enjoy having to share his space. So it's not a company thing, you know, it's more about, do they need it? Do they need it? Well, as a species, we don't think that they do, but there'll always be ones that like it. You know, there's always be ones, outliers, that kind of go, no, I really like people around, or I really like company, or no, I really don't. But generally, it's important not to assume that they're all the same as dogs, because cats and dogs aren't the same. You know, obviously they're different species altogether.
Yeah, that's so much you just said there that's really quite interesting. And I think it's kitchen logic, isn't it, that people, let's say, for example, that they had a cat, and from a human's perspective, they may feel, oh, I'm at work a lot, I think my cat needs company, let's get another cat. I mean, first of all, is it correct that the cat needs company in the first place? Probably not, in an animal form. But if that cat does need company, it may not be the right thing for that cat to have another cat as company. It might be something, a dog may be better, and that just goes against our commonsensical minds, doesn't it? Because you think, well, cat won't like the dog, but maybe if the dog is not able to get to the surfaces that you're talking about, it might not be as intrusive as another cat that could follow that cat up on high surface.
Yeah, I mean, I've never happily never advised anyone get a dog instead of another cat. I've never done that, and I would be really cautious about doing that, because some cats do not appreciate having a dog around either, you know, and we just happen to be fortunate in our household that we've introduced them when they were very young, and they just kind of family, you know, so that doesn't always happen. And I think that dogs could predate quite quickly on a cat if you're not careful and chase the cat, and that causes an enormous amount of stress for the cat in the household. So I wouldn't necessarily assume that getting a dog would be a better option. But what I'm trying to say, I think, is that that, you know, generally as a species, it's not a huge requirement that they have social contact with other cats particularly, but it doesn't mean to say that they aren't good companions for us and that they don't benefit from that interaction, because yes, we're pretty sure that they do, but I think it's more about having choices for the animal. And if we're just bringing in more and more animals, you know, they don't have those choices and they don't have that option, when maybe that wouldn't be the option that they would choose for themselves.
Okay, now, so looking at the situation that we're in at the moment, with lockdown, what do you think dog owners can do right now to help prevent the likelihood of separation anxiety from happening after lockdown? You know,
well,
what can they do to prepare them right now for when things are more relaxed, whenever that may be?
I mean, and you've just said it, really, right now is the right time to start. So I would say, let's not wait until we've got a problem before we start preempting the new routine. So we may not know what shape that routine might be, but we do know, okay, I am going to be out of the house more again. Maybe I was before, and they had to adjust one way to get used to me being around, and now they've got to adjust another way. Now it's obviously summer holiday as well for the schools, or on its way. So I think that's a slightly trickier one if you've got children as well. But I would say starting now rather than waiting. So if you know you're going to be possibly going back to work this week, next week, the week after, start now anyway, because it's all about routines. It's all about a new routine that you're trying to get them to adapt to, rather than a sudden contrast change, because that's something that they will really notice, and they may or may not cope. You know, we don't want to be stuck in a sink or swim situation with them, because that on the whole might cause them a lot of stress. So I would start to reduce the time that they are dependent on us. So in other words, if, like, it's very easy, isn't it, to just sit there, even if you're at your home desk with the dog on your knee or the cat on your lap or whatever, is to start just not always doing that as much. not trying to deny them contact, but just having times where you're there but you're not available. So that might just be that, you know, you give them plenty of distractions, you put on your normal noise that you used to put out, like if you normally switch on the radio, and you accompany that with a relaxation time for them where they are separated from you somehow. But you might be either in the next room or upstairs, or they might be upstairs. So they've got their safe haven that you're quite happy for them to be in, where their bed is, where their water is, you know, but that you aren't 100% available at that point. So starting with that now is quite easy. And then what you can do while you're there is monitor them, because you're there and you can hear them. If you do have a little camera set up, you don't have to spend a lot of money. Like I say, if you've got an old smartphone of any sort, or just another laptop around the house, or just anything that's got a camera on it, there are apps that are free and you can link them, so you can actually keep a little eye on them. Some people don't like to do that because they feel they get a bit obsessed, but you can then watch what they're up to. That's reassuring, because you can see if they are panting, pacing, looking at the door. You know, it doesn't have to be extreme, but are they, or do they just kind of go, you know, fast asleep, which is really what we want. You know, they chew their chews and whatever. So if you've set that up, and then you do that at the times of day normally that you might be not there, then that helps them to kind of just adapt a little bit while you're there. And then when you're not there, it's not such an obvious thing. So I probably wouldn't announce to my pets that I'm going any more than I would announce that I was home, because I don't want to make it into a big deal. I want to make it a matter-of-fact part of the day. Now, we don't know how much impact that has on them, but I just think the more low-key and, you know, ordinary you can make things, the better for them. And, you know, like I've mentioned many times, tired dogs aren't bored. You know, a tired dog that's been out, you know, you have to get up earlier, you've got to take them out, but they'll come back and they'll conk out, or they'll be more likely to. So it's something that we have to build into our new routine. So it's not just get up and hang around in your slippers and go to the home office and walk the dog in the afternoon. It might be, okay, on my work day, you know, I'd get up, I'd take the dog out, I'd go, you really need to start doing that now. You know, because I think all of those things will build up to be a very nice new routine that then can continue when you're actually not in the house.
Yeah, actually, that's again some really good points there. So just to go through quickly, you're saying start now, initiate more disconnection whilst you're at home when you can, and you can monitor. Use a monitor. Really great advice about that. Use an old iPhone, because I think most people would think I've got to go out and buy something that's ridiculously expensive. Try to create a future routine as much as you can, and this is where I fall down. Don't make a big announcement. That tends to be my go-to routine, which I'll try to change. Don't make it a big deal. Keep it low key, and if you can, get up earlier in the morning and take your dog out for exercise before your daily routine starts. Is that about right?
Yeah, and I think what I'd also do is when if you're sort of feeling like, but I like saying goodbye, why not say goodbye by giving them the things that are going to occupy them when you're gone. So, for example, in our household, when we go up to bed, the dogs all get a biscuit. You know, that's what happens. They all run to their bed. They can't wait for their biscuit, you know, because they're going to get a biscuit. Now, we're going off up the stairs, which they might not particularly love, but they love the fact that they're getting a biscuit, because that means, you know, yes, you are about to go, but I'm getting something. So that is obviously a very quick thing. But what I might do is, you know, provide them with a longer lasting toy with some more things inside that will take them a while to get out. But you need to check what you're giving them, obviously, because it needs to be safe. And if you've got more than a dog, we don't want any battles, of course, but it's about building up the kind of the shores of against disappointment, you know. So when you're gone and they like you, they're disappointed and they can be frustrated because they can't get to you anymore. So what we want is to go, well, it doesn't matter that I've gone. What matters is you get these things to do. And then they kind of think, oh, like, you know, that's good, actually. Can you go? Because I want this thing. So I'd much rather my dog felt like that.
Yeah. Giving them something that is, so as a reward, but as you say, quite rightly, it has to be safe, because if you're not going to be there, we don't want a choking hazard.
No, absolutely.
That's great. And do you think if a dog, so this is what we're dealing with there, is if you've got a dog at home that has not ever displayed separation anxiety before, but you're worried it might happen. What about for those dogs that have separation anxiety? Can it be cured, or is it something that can only be managed?
I mean, obviously we would hope that we can resolve it, but it depends on many factors. It depends on the needs of the dog. So if the dog is exceptionally in need of companionship, then we can't resolve that because that is an innate thing that they have. We can alleviate the symptoms to a degree by doing some of the things I've mentioned before, which are things like, you know, giving them things to do and making a routine into the fact that they can cope alone. And we have to do that very thoroughly if we have an existing problem. If it's a fairly fresh issue, of course, it's slightly easier as a rule to kind of intervene because they haven't had a learning experience over many years. But if it's been something that's been on and off for a long time, then there's a chance that they've learned lots of different things from it, and that can be much harder to deal with. I think a lot of separation anxiety problems can take a lot of time to resolve if they're going to. And sometimes, yes, it might literally be that we can only manage the problem. But having said that, happily, we have much better services on offer nowadays, generally when we're not in lockdown, where we can have, you know, people looking after our dogs for us while we're out. You know, there is daycare, there are dog walkers, there are, you know, some people that are looking to look after a dog but they can't have one of their own, and there are systems and networks for that. So I think that it's not the end of the world. It could have been, if we can say, okay, look, you know, we've tried treating this issue, we've done it for a long time, but the dog has a very big need to be with people and really isn't coping in spite of all our intervention, then can we give them other places to be, people to be around and so on, to help them cope on those days where we're not there. Usually we see improvement, but quite what the degree of that is depends. It really does. It depends on also what the family are able to do. The more gradual separation we can introduce, the better, but we can't stop people leaving their animals altogether. You know, there are some situations where we might have to say, look, this dog is at risk, we have to help them, you know, and we'd obviously always, with every behaviour problem, get a vet check first anyway, because, you know, if a dog is not feeling very well, then that's likely to contribute to any problems that they already have, and we need the vets on board, you know, just to make sure the dog's really well cared for.
You mentioned doggy daycare and dog walking for people that are at work, and not, you know, we have to work. That's a fact of life for most people. Lucky people that don't have to work. But for those who are at work and they've maybe thought in the past, maybe now's the time to look for a good, you know, reputable, trustworthy dog walker. Is that something that you highly recommend for majority of dogs out there, that if their owners are at home, that they really should look at a dog walker to break up the day?
Yeah, oh yeah, I mean, I think so. I think that it's just a lot to ask a dog to just sort of sit there on their own. And they have a right to it, you know, they have a legal right, if you like, they're protected rights to behave as normally as they need to behave. So I think it's not, you know, it's not me wagging the finger, it's saying, look, this is best for them. So yeah, you can, there's lots of services available now. You can shop around, you can ask people that you might know who might recommend somebody. I would check, obviously, that they are properly licensed, properly insured, that you like the way they handle the dogs in their care, those kinds of things, and that it's right for your dog, because not every dog wants to be walked with lots of other dogs. They might just want to be walked by themselves with somebody, you know, or they might just want to hang out with other dogs all day and not play all day, you know. So can the centre or can the professional provide for those things, just as any other care might be provided for your dog? So I think it's worth just doing your homework and having a look at the options that are available, because there are now lots more options than there ever were. So you can fit, you know, hopefully what's right for your dog to the people that you're working with. So I think it's actually quite a positive step forward for dog care these days.
And if somebody is watching this now and they have a dog that has definitely diagnosed separation anxiety, what should they be doing right now as a first step? Contacting a professional like yourself, or?
Yeah. I mean, I would first of all, I would get my dog checked by my vet, because they might not be feeling very well. You know, it's not always obvious. It really isn't. It could be a niggling pain that they've got, or it could be that they, that's something that they're not very good at showing us necessarily, that they aren't very well. So we tend to only notice the really extreme times. So I would always get my vet to check my dog over, and then I would ask my vet to refer. If the vet says, oh no, that's fine, or yes, we can treat this, but you still know that you're going to go home and your dog's going to panic when you leave, then ask your vet to refer you. So to a certificated clinical animal behaviorist is usually somebody who is also good at training, but they're actually specialists in behavior problems of this sort. So it's not a case of just kind of seeing who's available. You need to go to somebody who's properly qualified, because they will assess everything that's involved and give you the best, ideally the best prognosis, the best diagnosis of what the issues are, and hopefully the most thorough treatment. It's important, I think, on lots of levels, that you get the right people to help you. And it isn't that people aren't willing to help. It's more, I would avoid going on, a little bit of research here and a little bit of research there and a bit of advice here and a bit of advice there, because what you actually need is someone to look at you, your family, your dog, their environment, the routine and the timetable that they've got, and then to tailor the advice that you get given to exactly what they need. And then you can be absolutely sure you've done everything you can to help them.
And generally, speaking, so say you're contacted, you help, what are the steps that you apply for people to try and stop or manage that separation anxiety? What does that look like?
So the pattern might be something like, often clients have everything to tell me. They've got lots and lots of information about their dog. Often they've videoed it as well. If they haven't videoed it, it's not essential, because I do trust what they tell me, but then what we start to do is analyze, okay, what are the triggers that are setting this off? Because it's not just a case of the person there or not there. It's usually signs that they're going to leave. And that can be times of day, it can be gestures that we make, it can be all sorts of things. And those are things that will create an anxiety build-up. So it's not necessarily starting at the point where they leave. So what we then have to do is start to work on all of the things that will improve the dog's maintenance coping behavior. So what can they cope with, what can't they cope with, where does that start from, and then what can we ask the dog to do instead that they enjoy, and gradually build that skill up, because it is a skill, of relaxing and managing to just kind of stay relaxed while those triggers are commencing, if you like. So it might be we start with the mildest thing, like it could be something obvious, like somebody just putting their shoes on, and it might be that the dog is flinging itself into a panic at that point. Well, okay, we're not going to try and deal with a panicking dog. What we're going to try and deal with is, okay, it's a certain time of day. Can we do it at a different time of day where they see the shoes come in and out? Can we teach them to calm down and do something else that's more enjoyable? And then gradually what we do is build that up, so that we've got all of those triggers that made it unpleasant for the dog built up and paired with times where the dog can enjoy themselves or be, rewarded by doing something else. And that needs to be very thorough. What we don't do is just say, put the radio on, or there are lots and lots and lots and lots of things that will stimulate a dog's, worry. And that could be that it's gone from a noisy house to being silent. So yes, leaving some noise on is good, but that's never the only thing. Do you see what I'm getting at? So we have to be, treatment can be lots and lots of different areas, but it has to be thoroughly looked at in all of those areas, so that we really help from the ground up, rather than just smoothing over the surface, close the curtains and put the radio on, doesn't deal with the fact that the dog is lonely, So it's those kind of things that we look at.
You mentioned triggers. In your experience, what are those common triggers? You mentioned putting shoes on, for example. Is that a common one?
Yeah. Anything that is a sign that you are departing and the dog doesn't like the fact that you're departing, that they are predicting from what the environmental cues are that you aren't going to be there, and they don't like that. So let's assume the dog doesn't like that for whatever reason. So what they will do is, they will look carefully at the things that mean that you're about to do that. So that can be picking up your keys, putting your coat on, depending on the time of year. It could be that you're rushing a bit more. It could be always in the morning, because obviously, we go to work at the same time pretty much every day, some of us. So, you know, it's those kind of obvious things, but it might just be, you know, some people talk about this sixth sense that their animals have. You know, they only have to think about something and they're there at the door. Well, it's probable that our body signals are giving away an awful lot. You know, you might just glance at the clock thinking, oh, what time is it? Or pick up your phone quickly and look at it. They notice those sorts of things all the time. So what might appear to be quite a subtle trigger to us is actually a real announcement for them. So you're saying, you know, oh, I'm going now. They're kind of like, yes, Kelly, we knew that. We knew that 3/4 of an hour ago, you know, because you came down and you were, I don't know, looking at your bag or setting your packed lunch up, or, you know, so
yeah,
we
the routine.
Yeah, and dogs are brilliant at routine, like brilliant at it, because they don't use language to kind of dictate, oh, this is going to happen in 10 minutes time. They go, okay, so you looked out the window, and then you sort of pick your keys up and put them back down, and then you put your shoes on, and then you picked up your bag, and then, you know, and it's really subtle. So we have to kind of break apart those as triggers for anxiety, because obviously you are going to pick up your bag, you know, but you do get situations where people say, well, the dog's all right if I go out the back door, but not if I go out the front door, you know, because but you're still going out. It's just one is a very obvious repetitive trigger, and the other one is a bit of a new one where the dog's going, oh, I don't know if that predicts that you're not coming back or not. You see what I mean? So we have to look at everyone's case individually rather than try and apply a blanket solution, because yes, it might work, but it's not going to be, you know, quite right necessarily.
Yeah. And you also mentioned about trying to teach them to be calm. You know, obviously as human beings, it's a good idea for us to meditate and to have feelings and words in our minds about calmness and peace and stillness, but you can't teach that to a dog because they don't speak English. So how do you teach them to be calm?
I mean, everyone has different treatment patterns. So I have my favourites that I think I find work really well. Often what I don't want my dog to do is to be at the door fretting, say. I don't want that. What I want them to do is to be in a nice cosy space that they've always learned to associate with something enjoyable, and to relax. So I would spend probably quite a lot of time teaching them bit by bit to go to that space and lie down, or just sit there and just spend a bit of time going maybe in and out gradually, so that they learn that I'm always coming back, but I'm doing that in short bursts. And they start to think, oh, that's not all I have to do is stay here. And she leaves, and then she comes back, and not only has she come back, but I maybe get a little bit of food, or I get, you know, something extra in my toys or something like that. And so they start to cope with those short bursts of being left and relax whilst that is happening, because we're promoting, you know, a laying down or a sit or something like that the dog understands. So then they have something to sort of hook onto and go, well, if I stay here, then you'll come back. And then that reinforces the fact that they stayed there. So you gradually stretch that time. And then once they've got that idea that, oh, well, I stay here and the world kind of revolves around me, but it wasn't terrible, and you came back lots of times. And then we gradually grow that into longer time periods. And then once we've got that kind of maintenance coping behavior where the dog goes, oh, she's going out, you know, she'll be a few minutes, then she'll come back, and then she'll give me a bit of chicken or whatever it happens to be that's right for that dog. And then we can start to pair it with the actual leaving signals. But we can't do that until we've given the dog a nice safe space for them that they've learned to enjoy. And that is an art, you know, it really is. It has to be very thorough, it has to be applied in the right way. The training plan has to be put together in such a way that the dog doesn't predict bad things, that they only predict rewarding things. And that takes a bit of thought, and I have to work with owners on that basis, because every dog is different. You know, just because the problem is similar, this dog might like this reward and this dog might not. You know, this dog might not cope with this person even stepping an inch away. You know, so we're very thorough about that. But once the dog starts to understand, nothing bad happened, and I just had a bit of a rest, and then they came back, and, you know, so we can stretch it. Where it goes from there depends. You know, every case, like I say, is different. But sometimes we manage to get it to the point where the worst part for the dog is the person going out the door. And that's their worst time. So if we can get them past that bit, then generally they cope really well. Others don't mind about that, but they'll get to a certain period of time and they'll be like, right, I've got nothing else to do now. I've finished my Kong, I've finished this, what am I going to do? And that's when they get agitated. But classically, in terms of anxiety and attachment problems, it's to do with the leaving part. So that's the bit we try and break apart and work with and build up back into a different scenario, so that they, like I say, they actually look out for, are you going now because I quite enjoy my quiet time and my toy and my chew and my, because I know I can predict now that you're coming back. But it's just stretching that time.
And talking about time, do you think, I don't know if there's any way of knowing this, so if you don't know, just say, Kelly, that's a silly question. But do you think there's any way of knowing if dogs experience time in the same way that we do? We've gone for 2 hours. If I say to my children, for example, I'm going to be gone for 2 hours, there's an awareness, there's a level of awareness. They know 2 hours to them seems like an eternity, and actually probably feels like for them 2 hours feels longer than in reality it is.
Mm-hmm.
Similar with dogs, do you think, or do you think time is, it's irrelevant to them?
I mean, I think they obviously, I don't know if they think about the concept of time, because I don't know if it's especially useful for them, but I think they know times of day in terms of, the light, the changes in the atmosphere, the changes, because Mother Nature would be like, okay, it's time to go out hunting now. The rabbits are out, it's dusk, those kinds of things. I think they're going to be aware of that, but quite whether we obviously we can't communicate to them when we're going to be 2 hours, because that is a man-made concept anyway, the idea of an hour.
Although we probably do. I mean, I do. I say to my dogs, I'll be back in half an hour. Like they know, of course.
That's part of your maintenance,
that's part of my mental health.
I think
we're honest.
It's fair to say that, when you're asleep, you're not really aware of the passing of time. When you're having fun, that old saying, time flies when you're having fun, you're not aware, where did the time go? And we all say that, so I don't think that it's unusual to think if a dog's busy doing something, they're not going to be thinking about the hours ticking away. But I think if they're sat there, if you've ever sat there waiting, even if you know that your appointment or whatever it is at such and such a time, but you're waiting, it is the most boring thing. And boring is, there is nothing rewarding to do. That's basically what boredom is. There's nothing more rewarding in this environment for me to do. So I think that rather than think about it as the concept of time, I would think of it in the concept of activity. And they don't have to be 100% active all the time. They do need to sleep. But even sleeping is a thing to do, right? So if they've done their sleep and they've had their toy and then they have, nothing else to do, that's when we start to think about, okay, that's not fair, because their concept of activity and just having things to do runs out after a while.
Yeah, that's actually really useful, because the you were talking about enjoying or being bored and time changing almost. If I go for a run for half an hour and I'm not really feeling like I want to, that's a long half an hour.
Yeah.
Couch with a bar of chocolate for half an hour, that goes pretty quickly because I'm really enjoying that. And I guess it's the same thing with dogs. If they're enjoying themselves, whether that be sleeping, eating, playing, being, if they're happy, time's fine.
Yeah, and I mean, it's possible to overstimulate them. I mean, you can, it's like us again, if you're doing something that's very activating for a long time, you're going to get tired, so it's kind of, I would say, if we're trying to pan out our dog's day, rather than going, okay, it's 2 hours of this and then an hour of that thing, okay, how much brain exercise is my dog getting? How much physical exercise is my dog getting? And how much rest is my dog getting? It's rest that they need. They need lots of rest. Dogs sleep a lot, but they don't sleep for 6 hours at a stretch in the daytime and then another 6 hours a stretch. That isn't usual. I mean, maybe if they're very, very old, and puppies will sleep for a long time. But again, it's in short bursts. So it's a case of knowing your dog, and are they just sleeping? Particularly, I think you see this with cats a lot. If they're quite depressed and unhappy, they will sleep a lot. So it's not necessarily a good thing. So again, if you can balance out the time you've got to spend away from the house, like I say, in a magic world, we'd all be around our pets all the time. But even then, in lockdown, we've all got a bit fed up, haven't we? Same four walls, same pressure, so variety is good. and part of that variety needs to be rest. So I would try and coincide my times of being away with my dog's times of some things to do by themselves and rest. And then that way, when I'm back, we're together. And if I can't provide that, then I would ask someone else to help me with that, just because I know that's what my animals need, you know. And it's not a perfect world, I accept that, but it does prevent an awful lot of the sort of negatives that might come along with it.
Looking at this from a slightly different angle, in terms of we're at home now, most dogs are really enjoying having the company. What about those dogs who have been used to most of their life being on their own for quite a long time and being very happy, maybe an older dog, and all of a sudden everybody's here, and maybe people have noticed that my dog doesn't seem very happy at the moment.
Yeah.
Is that something to question as well? Is that a problem too? What can we do?
It can be. I mean, a lot of my caseload is resource guarding problems with dogs, and that can stem from obviously resources, but resources can be, as well as items, it can be things like attention, or it can be locations, it can be comfy sofas, it can be, you know, all sorts of things, or a combination of all of those and more, territory type things. And what I've found happens since lockdown is those number of cases referred to me have increased. I see a lot anyway, and I do specialise in that, but I've seen an increase because the dogs can't, you know, they haven't got the space that they used to have, and they aren't used to sharing, and they don't like sharing because they've already got an issue with that, maybe that was a bit more low key, but now it's become more obvious because the kids are there and they want to stroke the dog more, and the dog's a little bit more grumpy because it wants to be in its bed and it doesn't want to be stroked, but then it maybe has a chew as well, and normally it would enjoy that with nobody bothering it, and now they are. So yes, I mean, I think that's definitely the case. And I think, like I touched upon earlier as well, they can get overtired, they can get overstimulated, and that will make them fractious and grumpy just like us, you know. So it's about knowing your own pet and having enough of a bond with them that you understand, okay, they like this, they don't like that. So that doesn't mean you tiptoe around, it just means if they don't like something and it's more extreme, we have to get help to teach them that actually it's not a problem. So it might be that, yes, they don't like the extra noise and they find it worrying. It's not all about resources. It might be that they're afraid of, you know, fast movement or noise, or, you know, they might not like that. So again, we get to know the dog. We look at their signals and we look at, are they avoiding it? You know, are they trying to get away? Okay, well, what we'll do is we'll give them their own little space that they can choose to go to and chill out. And the rule is in the house, okay, nobody bothers the dog when they're in their chill out space. Leave them be. Let them enjoy their dinner, let them enjoy their chew, just, you know, just back off, let them have a nap. And then you usually find that they wake up and they're all jolly and they'll, you know, come and see you when they want to. But yes, I think that's definitely increased problems of that type. Yeah, absolutely, because they haven't had that escape route that they would have otherwise had, because we would have left them, you know.
Okay, and getting back to separation anxiety a little bit, there are calming supplements on the market, aren't there? Do you know much about those? Do you think they work? Do they offer miraculous recoveries when they really shouldn't be? What's your opinion on the items on the market that promise a quick solution?
Well, you know, I mean, I think if your vet, because it's really a veterinary question, if you're giving something to the dog, you know, it's kind of a veterinary issue. If your vet doesn't recommend it to you, they, believe me, if they knew a way of doing it that would just make it better, then they would, you know. So yes, there are other products out there that probably have had no research, or there might be some tenuous writings about what it does for people, or, you know, I personally don't recommend those, and professionally I don't recommend those, just because we haven't got enough data, you know. And if the data's there, then the vets would be saying try it, you know. If the data isn't there, first of all, ethically we wouldn't, because that would probably not be true, or we might not be helping, so, you know, we have to help. But we wouldn't deny a pet some treatment if we felt like they needed it. You know, no one would deny it. So I think the answer is take it all with a pinch of salt, speak to your vet about it, because if it's promising big things, why why isn't the vet already saying? Because guarantee they would, I would. So it's really that we don't have enough evidence to solidly say, yes, this is brilliant. And believe me, if we all had a magic wand, we would use it, we definitely would. So what it might do is mask the issue more. You might think there's a kind of owner placebo, oh, well, I'm giving them this thing and it says on the box, but it's very carefully worded. Is it really helping? Maybe not, maybe, I don't know. But is it delaying the bigger issues for treatment? Probably. And that would be a worry of mine. So I wouldn't say, well, it's all nonsense, because we just don't have the evidence, and if we have got the evidence, then we would suggest it. Trust me, we definitely would.
Because I'm just thinking, obviously, with people being at home, and we know the amount of online shopping has gone through the roof, will be maybe people spending more time looking and searching for information, and so there could be things that just pop up. Oh,
yeah,
try me, I can help calm your dog. And as you say, if it's not proven, there's no data, your vet's not talking about it, then maybe don't waste your money. And
I think, because you don't know. The problem is, if there's no data, you don't know what it's going to do. So that could be that it might actually be harmful, but we don't know, and that would always worry me. It's not just about what it costs, because most of the owners that I work with would spend anything, to help their dogs, and do anything to help them. They would absolutely. But I sort of think, well, if there's no data, then has it been tested properly? If it hasn't been tested properly, do I really want to be giving it to my animals? I don't know. I'm not convinced myself. And I certainly professionally wouldn't recommend it without data, because that would be dangerous. So, I would always ask the vet. If the vet says, yes, go ahead, or they give you their opinion, then they are medically trained and they will tell you. But it opens the door for them to say, well, how about this thing that has been tested? What about this opportunity? Why don't we refer you to a behaviorist? And then you've got a professional's viewpoint, which I think is much safer in general.
And then just finally, and I guess, again, it could be a bit of a strange question, but seeing as dogs are pack animals, they like to be part of the family, and naturally in the wild, they would spend time together. I'm conscious that some people might think that their dog, if he or she has separation anxiety, might think there's something, the situation is wrong, but something's wrong with their dog.
Right.
So, how would you say separation anxiety, although heightened, is it's normal part of their nature, but we as humans don't want to accept that they want to be together all the time when we force them to live in our human society. Is it unusual? Is it normal, separation anxiety? Bit of a strange question.
No, I think it's a really good question, because obviously I deal with a lot of people that are very anxious themselves because they want their dog to be happy, and that's, of course, so I get it. I totally understand. I think that there are levels. So it's whether it's actually impacting on your quality of life. And that is very difficult sometimes to accept, that, something that you're doing, such as going out to work or even just popping to the shop, is severely impacting your dog's quality of life. That is horrible. So it's not an unnatural thing for your dog to absolutely think you're the bee's knees, but the extent of their response is a bit unusual in the general population, but it's still, they love you too much, and then that's kind of quite hard to accept, I think. But I've worked with lots of owners that have had dogs all their lives and never had this problem before. Not every dog has the same start, so it might be that they haven't had it since a puppy and it's had these problems either built up over a period of time, nothing to do with them, or it was going to do it anyway, it just happened to be that they picked that particular puppy. All of those things come into when we do behaviour consultation, because what I want to do is empower owners to feel like, okay, look, there is a responsibility you have in changing this dog's environment to a degree. Mother Nature's given the dog a certain amount of coping skill. It may be that you weren't involved in the early part, or you were, but what we're looking at right now is the dog in front of us, and what we're looking at is ways to make that dog feel better. So even if you might feel like, maybe I should have done this, maybe I should have done that, maybe I could get another dog, maybe I could do that, don't worry about all of that. Let's look at what we've got in front of us and help this pet right now that needs us. And then people feel empowered, because then they can go to any lengths that they can to try and change everything else around the dog. But what we cannot do, or we can only temporarily do, is change the dog's overall, who they are, because they're never going to change who they are. They are themselves. But what we do is change how they deal with those feelings and how they deal with those situations. And that's one of the most rewarding things, I think, because you still got your dog. They're still the same dog. It's just that, it's not all about us, and it's not all about them. It's kind of that mishmash. And there are some times where they just never learn to cope because it just means too much. But then at least we've done even 50% better is better, or even 5% better is better. But what we're going for is as good as we can get. And then hand on heart, we can say, we've really tried our best. We've done everything we can think of, and that generally makes things manageable. So yeah, I think it's a good question. I think it's a hard question.
Yeah, sorry.
No, because I think, obviously part of our job is counselling, and we have to try and deal with how people are feeling about their pet, because if we don't change how they feel, nothing's going to change for their pet at all.
Yeah. Okay, so I mean, that's amazing, Karen. Thank you. I think what we'll do, just to finish off with, is just to reiterate those practical tips that you mentioned about halfway through, just so just to re-emphasize those points. That if people are thinking in a little while we're going to be going back to work, we know that people should start making changes now. Create more disconnections in the home when they're at home, just frequently throughout the day. Use a monitor if you can, but an old phone is fine. Mirror future routines as much as you can. Don't make big, loud, crazy announcements. Don't make it a big deal, and keep it low key, and exercise your dog in the morning so that your dog is more tired.
Well, yeah, before you go. So if you work nights,
before you go. So I think a lot of people, and innocently, will say, I take my dog for a walk when I get home because it helps me unwind. That's quite normal, isn't it? So I think that's a game changer, actually.
Well, you probably need a walk when you get home as well.
Earlier. Sorry?
You probably need one when you get home as well. So you can still have your unwind, but you want your wind down.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I suppose we need to just clearly say is, make sure that where your dog has when they're on their own is somewhere that they really love being, that they've always got the same environment, that it's the same music you normally play, or it's the same chit chat on the radio, or classical music, whatever they like to listen to during the day that you're normally got on. Some people have the telly on all the time, you've got to think about it, but if it suddenly goes dead silent and there's nobody there, that's a big change. So you could try and keep that continuity of environmental things. Plus, having noise does stop them being stimulated by noises outside, which can sometimes wake them up, and then they miss you all over again. So having that kind of continuity and a safe haven is a really nice thing to provide for them, so they've got somewhere lovely to be when you're not there.
Yeah, and personalize it to your dog's needs, I guess, as well, isn't it? I like, for example, to humanize it, really like chocolate. Not everybody does. Not everybody's dog is going to like that one specific toy or that treat or whatever. So it's about finding out what's good for your dog.
Yeah, absolutely. And anything that, obviously not chocolate for dogs, but anything.
Yeah, no, I know that was.
I know. Anything that you give them ideally needs to last long enough for them to kind of, get over that first period of, they've gone. Whereas if you just give them, I'd like I said, bedtime biscuit, that's gone and it's over, but that's bedtime. Whereas daytime, I try and think, okay, something that's going to last a little bit longer means that they will gradually peter out that feeling of frustration or, anxiety of, I've been left. It might be, I'm doing this for a while. And the longer it takes, the busier they are, the more inclined they are to rest after that as well. So it's kind of those things that we don't really think about. We are busy with our lives, and what we're doing is thinking about them a little bit more and thinking about their experience of what happens once that front door has closed.
Great. And if anybody wants to contact you for advice or help, where can they contact you?
So you can Google my name, Karen Wild, W-I-L-D, or you can go to my website, which is pawprintpets.com. but I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter. So if you just Google my name, it will bring up some way of contacting me, and you know, just send me a message, and you know, we can get chatting about how we can help.
Yeah, virtually,
yeah, online at the moment.
Great. Okay, thank you very much, Karen.
You're welcome.
Remember, everybody, don't feed your dog chocolate. It's very bad.
No.
Just keep that for yourself. All right, thank you, Karen. We'll speak soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Only you know your pet's individual character. But IAMS knows the nutrition they need for 7 signs of healthy vitality, all with a great taste. Full of character, full of IAMS.